The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. How to be a Chief People Officer. In 2012, Google set out to figure out why some of its teams succeeded and others stumbled. The company launched Project Aristotle. The team assigned to the project studied every aspect of employee performance. 180 teams throughout the company were examined in great detail. What they couldn't find was a definite pattern to success. Well, fast forward 12 years later. The dynamics of enabling people in an evolving workplace have changed significantly, says Jennifer Geary, the co-author of How to Be a Chief People Officer. Geary says that central to this new dynamic in the workplace is that when a company's mission, vision, purpose, values, and goals are mirrored in how people actually think, act, and operate, then the company has a strong culture. Key to developing this alignment is a C-suite role that brings humanity back to the workplace. Geary says managers are drowning under the weight of people-related tasks, while employees demand ever more from their workplace. I invited Jennifer Geary, the co-author of How to Be a Chief People Officer, to join me for a conversation that matters about strategically enabling sustainable organizations. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, Stuart. It's nice to be here.
You know, I talk about in the intro strategically enabling people to create sustainable organizations. This is basically elevating the level of thought, care, planning that goes into how do you build out recruitment, teams, and so on. What led you to say, okay, now is the time that we have to create a book like this to help people who are now going to start to fulfill these kinds of roles in significant organizations?
When Anne and I set out to create this book, we were very cognizant that we are in a very different time to before. We have 5 different generations of people in the workplace, from Gen X through to Gen Z, all with different expectations and all with different implied contracts with what they think it means to come to work. You also have increasing regulation, increasing social outrage when things go wrong, and all of it boils into a very, very complex landscape for human resources professionals to navigate. And I think in the past, what we had noticed was that you see a huge uptick in the amount of paperwork and assessments and forms to fill in that happens. And ironically, we think we're trying to make things safer for people, but what we're doing is actually dehumanizing the workplace. So what Anne and I set out to do was to go back to some very fundamental principles, to look at concepts like culture, strategy, how the organization executes, and to redraw the role of the CPO, bearing those things in mind, empowering managers and giving them that time back to work with their people in a new way.
So why does this role need to be at the executive level? Because in the past, when we looked at the HR role, it wasn't there in the C-suite. It was helping to fulfill the mandate of the company. Why does it now need to elevate to that executive level?
Absolutely. There has been this whole evolution of the role of people management, human resources, from the very functional processing of payroll locked away in a room somewhere to what we now view as this highly strategic role. And writers like Dave Ulrich also talk about this, the value of human capital, and the fact that we're still on quite an early part of the journey into calculating and understanding what that value is. That secret ingredient that Project Aristotle couldn't find, that corporate know-how, and all of the experience that Anne and others have brought to bear on this talks about empowering people, creating a place where employees feel safe in terms of how they work, feel able to express themselves, feel able to be themselves in work, feel able to customize their life cycle and take turns left and right. You know, it's a long way from the corporate rungs climbing the ladder that we used to think about before, and where everybody feels ownership and connection with the culture and with the strategy of the organization and what their place is in achieving that. And what you find then is that naturally leads to alignment, leads to satisfaction, leads to empowerment far more than any sort of benefits or payroll or other aspects may contribute.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Coming back to the question of why does it need to be at the executive suite level, though? What kind of authority does that bring with it that helps to ensure that the strategic vision around managing, maybe that's not even the right word, but working with teams and individuals to help them feel empowered? Why elevate it to that level?
Because the chief people officer is the steward and the keeper of employee culture, well-being, wellness, not the owner. I didn't say the owner. It must be owned collectively by the executive committee and by the board. But if you really want a workforce that is aligned with the strategy and vision and mission of the organization, and where everything about the employee experience, from talent acquisition through to the day they leave the organization, is lined up in the right way behind the strategy, you need somebody operating at that level. You need somebody who is privy to the culture and the strategy of the organization, who can advise and be a critical friend to the chief executive, to the rest of the C-suite, as to the decisions that they're making about hiring, and who can help them hire longer term, hire for skills, hire for the personality fits that they need, not just hiring to fill a job, to put a square peg into a square hole. This is a much more strategic way of thinking about people and creating and leveraging that human capital management.
So it sends one signal to the organization, but what signal does it also send within the executive suite, that when somebody who now has that moral and a factual responsibility around managing the human resources of an organization, when they then speak back to other executives, what weight do they then carry in their message?
Well, some of that weight comes obviously from the position and from the location on the executive committee, but the role of the chief executive in hearing and amplifying and playing back that role can't be overstated. So when you have, for example, a trade-off between the chief financial officer, who might want to cut costs or hire people at a different price point, versus the point of view of the chief people officer, who's saying, hang on a second, you said to me that you need these characteristics, that you want to hire for longevity, that you're looking for a particular type of person, to give equal weight in the room to those arguments, and for the CEO to signal what they believe in terms of the value of human capital, I think is incredibly important, as well as the position.
A couple of times so far in our interview, you've talked about people feeling safe. And we're not just talking about their physical safety. I think more importantly, we're talking about their psychological and emotional safety. Why is this so fundamentally important, especially as we move forward in a world that is far more driven by technological components, rather than just being able to manually move equipment or the resources or output of a company?
You make a very good point about technology, and not least in this world where we're staring down the barrel of AI and what that's going to mean, where we're going to use data and models in ways that they've never been used before, and where there's great upsides, but there's also great risk with that. And it's incredibly important. I have to confess, I initially found the term psychological safety a difficult one as someone from a chief risk officer background, because, does that mean something is psychologically unsafe if you don't do certain things? But it's a phrase that has taken hold. And what we've taken it to mean is creating that culture, that environment where, regardless of the level of seniority you have in the organization, regardless of your role, regardless of tenure, you feel able to speak up. You feel able to call out something that doesn't look right. You feel able to bring a point of view or a perspective, and safe in the knowledge that that will be listened to, and at least given some time. It may ultimately be discounted, but it's okay to bring forward those views. And increasingly, particularly the younger generations coming into organizations, they not just expect, they demand that. They demand to be heard. And there's a very famous case study here in the UK with the National Health Service, where they actively sought to make sure that the most junior nurse in an operating theatre could raise their hand if they saw something that didn't look right to them. Even though there would be surgeons and people, many pay grades and many levels of seniority above them, they needed to feel that they could speak up if they saw something wrong, and that came with great success.
Well, I think ultimately that psychological safety, that feeling of being respected and heard, was one of the strongest outcomes from Project Aristotle at Google. They came to realize that no, you don't just take the best and brightest or the smartest and just shove them all together. No, there has to be some sort of dynamic. Well, then that is going to be the right dynamic interaction of those team members. So then the responsibility comes back to, well, then how do you start to do those employee assessments and help to start build the right teams? And is this a significant part of the work that a chief people officer would be in charge of?
Absolutely. And one of the great things about where and how we work nowadays is that appreciation of the value of diversity in so many ways, diversity of background, but diversity of thought as well. And diversity of approach, diversity of how people approach issues and think about them and problem solve, rather than having a very linear, one size fits all way of doing things. And so it starts in our book, we talk about the 7 stages of the employee life cycle, from talent attraction to onboarding, to development, performance appraisal, and obviously as they leave the organization. And to respect and think about diversity and divergent ways of thought in every stage of that process, and to cherish and enhance that and make sure that at all stages of the organization, from leadership downward, that's being championed. And you gave a great podcast on accessibility, where you also talked about neurodivergency and creating that place where it's okay to bring thoughts in very different ways. And that's a huge part of the CPO role. And we know it's a huge part of the employee value proposition. It's what employees expect now.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. You remind me that one of the interesting components that came out of that interview about diversity and accessibility within the workplace is, of course, you then start to get perspectives that maybe your team never had, and you wind up opening up market opportunities that you may not have seen. So it goes back to the idea that the greatest resource that any organization has is the intellectual capability and the thoughts and ideas of its team members.
Absolutely. And that value, we're still only at the early days of even trying to place a value on that. And there's a sense that in the recent rounds of layoffs that happened at tech companies around the world, that maybe that wasn't fully taken into consideration when it was decided to let employees go. So it's not only what you see in terms of payroll and costs and everything else, but that know-how, that corporate knowledge, that way of working that's been built up over time, that has incredible value. And we need to be more evolved in how we think about that.
So how does an organization get started? They go, okay, Jennifer, I agree with you, but you're asking us to look at the whole human resources component of our business differently. And I know that you lay it out in your book, but for people who are watching right now, where do you start?
So we always start, all of my books always start with culture. No matter what the C-suite role is that you're dealing with, whether it's operations or risk and people, you've got to start with a diagnostic of the culture. Where is it today? How well defined is it? How strong is it? How positive is it? And there's lots of ways of assessing that culture and frameworks for looking at it. And you can take soundings from different levels of the organization. You can do surveys and so on. So that's where I would begin if I was coming into an organization, to begin with, taking a really, an initial pulse check as to where things stand and how people feel. And also, how consistent is it? How lived are the values? Every organization has a set of values up on the wall somewhere, but how lived are they? Are they lived in the decisions? Do the leaders demonstrate them in the decisions that they make and in how they make those decisions? And I always say, as a leader, it's very important not just to communicate your decision, but your thought process in that decision, so people can see that. So start with a diagnostic of culture. follow that up with a really deep understanding of the strategy of the organization. And again, I don't just mean the strap line, but I mean, what is it that this organization does that's unique? What is the value that it contributes to society, to the world? How sustainable is that? What's unique about it? Where is it going to go? And so you take those two things, and then only then you craft a people strategy where you say, right, let's take a look at the people that we have, at the strength of the culture, at the the organizational structure, at reporting lines and all that kind of thing, and think about the talent and the skills that we have and the talent and skills that we need. And needless to say, this isn't a one-off exercise. This is something. It's a big job to begin with, and it takes an awful lot of sounding points off different people in the organization. But then, you start with that, but you're going to be reviewing that constantly, checking in with people, creating communities of employees, checking in with them, hearing their points of view. And over time, hopefully, if you signal that willingness to listen, that willingness to embrace, to adapt and expand, and also to empower, to not just create a rigid structure that everybody has to fit into, but to allow people to take control of some elements of their benefits packages, of their career, of their lifestyle, of their development, then people start to believe. Slowly, sometimes it can take a little bit of time to build up that and to see that come through. Unfortunately, it takes an awful lot longer to build than it does to destroy, and we've seen that as well. I think in terms of some of the what's happened in recent years.
So patience is an important component, but there has to be a long-term strategic plan, because I think that, yes, you can say, okay, I've taken on this role, but first of all, you have to start with assessment. Where are we? Where are we going? Then you need to get managers throughout the entire organization to start to buy into that, and then, of course, the team members. How then do you start to go through the assessment process to say, if we maybe allow this person to explore this opportunity or that, or move to another team? Because I would think that starts to become an important part of this role, helping to make sure that you have the right teams together for those people who are a part of it. And the magnitude of that, to me, makes me go, okay, this is a lot of work, and you have to be very careful about how you move forward.
Yeah, well, first of all, it is a big and challenging job, but also it shouldn't be solely housed in one person or one team. The role of the chief people officer is to create the framework. The role of the people team is to establish the frameworks and boundaries, the ways of working, but to then give as much of that back to the managers, to give empowerment within that framework to managers. But you do make a good point, which is that there is, I think, particularly with recent generations and people just coming into the workplace, a very, very high expectation of what an employer will do for an employee. And of course, you want to create a place that is great to work, that people want to come in and be part of. You want an attractive employee value proposition. You want employees to feel self-actualized and so on. But there is a limit to that. And at some point, the employee does need to take responsibility for their own career, for their development, for their happiness. And Anne talks a lot about that in the book, about how, yes, we must do all these things, but we also must remember there is an employer-employee relationship, and there's only so far that an organization can go in that.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. You work your way through the process of realigning values, making sure that there is the culture that is going to be reflective of where the organization wants to go, and you start moving in that direction. Of course, there's always going to be movement within the employee workforce. Some people will retire, other people will leave for different reasons, and so on. So recruitment starts. But as you move forward in this process of really creating that empowering culture for team members, how then does that help to make the organization much more attractive from a recruiting perspective? Because we all know that that there are talent gaps now, and the competition for high quality employees is it's intense. So what's the benefit to an organization when they move in this direction?
And we've probably all had the experience of where we've been sold an organization or sold a role. only to come in the front gate, get our pass for the first day, and then go to the other side and realize it's not what was sold to us along the way. And again, in this era where everything gets shared socially, where Glassdoor is where people go first to check out an organization, that just doesn't work anymore. That feeling of outside to inside, and that dissonance is which was so crushingly disappointing, I think, for people when it happens. That just really won't work anymore because word will get out along the way. So what you're doing is creating a smooth process from when you've been attracting talent, interviewing, making the decision to hire somebody, and onboarding. You want that, particularly that onboarding piece, to be as positive as possible. And you really need to kind of watch that experience and learn from it and improve it as time goes by along the way. And then I think this idea of squiggly careers and movement, not just moving up the rung of the ladder, but embracing the diversity of the employee base that you have, and the fact that this talented person here may want to go over and try something over here over time. Word gets out around that. And when employees are fulfilled and happy and self-actualized, they will share that, and it kind of can't be faked, if you know what I mean. And there's nothing like word of mouth in terms of the reputation of organizations. So that employee value proposition, that word gets out, and that is far more powerful than whatever's on your recruitment website.
So there may be people who are watching this saying, I want to be a part of that, but do I have to have had that human resources experience and background? Is that the only way that I'm going to be eligible for this kind of role? Or are there other paths to this new role in significant organizations?
That was one of the drivers for writing this book, actually, because it does happen sometimes that somebody moves from another discipline to take over the people department, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. And it can happen, and it can be very successful. Obviously, there's to varying degrees of success. And again, what we tried to put in place here was the 7 pillars of HR excellence. So the way in which you surface your HR capability and expertise to give employees that great experience throughout their life cycle. So it can be done. Anne tells me she's seen it happen very successfully a number of times throughout her career, people coming in. So, you can have people who've come up through HR and who don't become a great chief people officer, and you can have people who come from outside and do. And obviously the opposite is also true. I think it's all about the willingness to embrace the discipline, see the value of it, live it authentically, and work with your exco and board to make sure that it's authentic and cascades through the organization.
And for organizations that have started to move in this direction, what are you seeing as far as the positive benefits for them?
It's not always immediately apparent. Sometimes there are things that you can do immediately, but I think what it gradually feels like is a kind of an awakening in the organization, a happiness, a brightness, more dialogue. You often see, I've written about the role of risk manager as well, and what you often see initially is kind of a surge in people putting their hand up, reporting things, reporting a near miss risk event, saying, I want us to learn from this and so on. But then and if those are treated well, and those opinions are reinforced, and people see that it's okay to speak up and so on, then what you start to get is a much more engaged, empowered, inclusive culture. You start to feel the innovation, new things start to come through, and it's not that tug of war. It's a genuine feeling of people going in the right direction. It's a great thing when it happens well.
Well, it's a wonderful book, and for anybody who's wanting to explore this opportunity that is emerging in organizations, I highly recommend it. Thank you for your time today, Jennifer.
Thank you.